Are you hoping to adopt a baby in the state of Tennessee, but finding yourself a little bit confused around the state law that applies to you, whether you're working with an adoption agency or trying to privately adopt a baby, maybe through self matching? Well, then stick around because today we're having a conversation with Jenny Hall. Jenny is a licensed adoption attorney in the state of Tennessee, and she's going to walk us through the entire process from start to finish. Let me take just a moment to introduce myself in case we haven't met yet. Hello, my name is Amanda, and I'm an adoptive mom on a mission to help hopeful adoptive families learn how to adopt without the overwhelming, unnecessary expense that can often come in the adoption journey. I do this by helping you learn how to adopt through easy videos like those here on the YouTube channel and helping you create and share your adoption profile. If you haven't already done so, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. All you have to do is click that little button, ring the little bell icon, and you'll get notified each time I release a new video. All right, let's dive right into our conversation with Jenny. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jenny. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We are super excited to have you here to talk a little bit more about adoption law in Tennessee today. Do you mind to first start by sharing a little bit more about yourself with the audience?
Sure. My name is Jenny Hall, and I'm an attorney in Tennessee. I've been licensed since 2001, so I'm getting old.
No.
And my practice is devoted to adoption and surrogacy law. And I love working with families and helping form families and walking folks through the process and being part of that journey.
That's awesome. You know, I didn't even pick up on the surrogacy part of your area of expertise. We'll definitely want to talk about that as well today.
Okay.
Do you mind to just start a little bit with an overview of adoption law in particular in Tennessee, just so we all get kind of level set on the same page for some of the basic information?
Sure. And I should say first, I'm sure every attorney tells you this is not, legal advice. This is a very broad brush overview because every situation is different and lots of times we have different states involved. So I'm happy to talk about it and also happy to talk to folks about their specific situation.
That is that's a very good disclaimer. The other disclaimer that I always share with folks as well is that if you are specifically talking about adoption or surrogacy, you need to talk to an attorney that specializes in that area. Thus, the reason why it's so important to have and in that state, because each state law does differ. So thank you again for that reminder. But yes, please continue.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tennessee is a little bit unique in that we require a judicial surrender of parental rights. So many states have what we call a consent to terminate parental rights, where typically you meet with a lawyer, oftentimes in the hospital. Sometimes there's a notary, sometimes there's witnesses required, sometimes there's waiting periods. So every state is a little different, but that's the general process in most states. In Tennessee, there is a 4-day waiting period. So if, for example, the birth mother gives birth on Monday, Friday is the first possible date we can go before a judge for her to surrender her parental rights. So it is an appearance in front of a judge. It's not in an open courtroom or anything like that. It's usually in chambers or in a conference room, and the birth mother is there. Her lawyer is there. A lawyer is not required under our law to represent the birth mom, but if you want to work with me, you got to do it. And the reason for that is to protect her, to make sure that she understands and is making a voluntary, informed decision. Yes. And it also protects the prospective adoptive parents so that she can't come back later and say, I didn't understand, or someone pressured me or forced me, or, whatever. So it's protection for both parties. And so I do require my prospective adoptive parents to pay for an attorney for the expectant mother or the birth mother. I will say that the surrender of parental rights, perhaps because it's such a sort of formal proceeding in front of a judge, it's very unusual that birth mothers revoke their surrender. At that point, we're, close to a week out. We've gone in front of a judge. The baby is placed immediately from the hospital with the prospective adoptive parents. But she does have 3 judicial days or business days to revoke that surrender for any reason. So
after the appearance with the judge.
Exactly. A lot of folks refer to it as a 10-day period because you've got your 4 days and you've got a weekend and you've got your 3 days. So
yeah,
technically it's, it feels like a very long time for those adoptive parents. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. In the 4-day window, just for clarity's sake, if baby is born on Friday, do Saturday and Sunday count in that 4-day window, or does it start on Monday?
That's such a great question. So the 4 days is calendar days.
Calendar days. Okay.
So the weekend does count. And then the 3-day revocation period is business days.
Business days. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay. So once baby is born at the hospital, is baby staying in the hospital until the 4-day period, or is baby discharged at whatever time is appropriate for baby, and the hopeful adoptive family would leave with a document that gives them rights to leave the hospital with baby? How does that part of it work in Tennessee?
Sure. So we do a lot of prep work before the baby is born, typically, unless it's a stork drop, of course. So we'll have a power of attorney in place already, which gives the prospective adoptive parents the right to access medical records, make medical decisions, and discharge from the hospital with the baby. So they are typically caring for the baby in the hospital. Most Tennessee hospitals, if they have a room, they're going to give it to the prospective adoptive family. So both the birth mom and the adoptive family have a room so that the adoptive family can bond privately with the baby. The birth mom, of course, gets as much access to the baby as she wants, and that varies widely from person to person. So yeah, the baby discharges from the hospital with the adoptive family.
Okay. And so at that point, then once baby discharges, you're going in front of, the judicial, apologies for the terminology, but you're going in front of the judge and having the kind of the initial meeting there. Are hopeful adoptive families present as well as the birth mom, or is it just a procedure or proceeding with the birth mom?
Yeah. So what happens is the birth mom and her attorney go in first. Okay. She executes the surrender of parental rights. And then the prospective adoptive parents and their attorney go in and speak to the judge privately. They accept the surrender of parental rights, and then they are granted guardianship of the child. So guardianship can be partial guardianship or full guardianship. And that has to do with whether all legal and putative fathers have been terminated. We do have a pre-birth consent to terminate parental rights in Tennessee. So it's certainly possible that the prospective adoptive parents are given full guardianship at that point. We often do partial guardianship too, and then have to go forward with a termination of parental rights against the biological father if we can't find him or whatever the situation is.
Okay. And in that type of situation, how does that typically work in Tennessee? If she identifies him, he can sign ahead of the court procedure is what I'm hearing. But if she does not identify him, is there a particular set of procedures that you must follow in Tennessee?
So if he is an unknown birth father, she will sign a paternity affidavit stating that he's unknown and explaining why he's unknown. So what was going on around that time that ended in, her not being able to identify the biological father. And that can be obviously a painful process. Yeah. And it's also necessary because our judges are going to require it. So if the birth father is unknown, we do not have to terminate his parental rights. He is not considered a legal or putative father that's entitled to notice of those proceedings. Okay. He does not meet criteria as someone whose rights need to be terminated.
Okay, that makes sense.
So if the definition of putative father in Tennessee has actually changed over the last few years. And it used to be that if a birth mother named that person, then they were by definition a putative father. And that is no longer the case. We now, under our statute, require that he takes some affirmative action to parent or to state an intent to parent the baby. So that can be something as simple as going to court and establishing paternity. You can do that prior to the birth. You can enter a claim with the putative father registry. You can claim or just state to the birth mother or an attorney or a social worker that you believe you are the biological father. Doing just that much puts you on that heightened level of being a putative father.
Gotcha.
But if you do nothing, then you're not entitled to service or notice.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. So you're still, the hopeful adoptive family is still caring for baby during this time, and then caring for baby through the 3 business days or judicial days of a revocation period after that. And at that point, what happens from there? Once the 3 days expire? And then also what happens if she does change her mind in those 3 days as well?
Yeah. So if she changes her mind during that revocation period, the baby is immediately returned to her.
Yeah.
And obviously that is a very difficult process I would say for everyone involved. Like I said before, revocation of surrender is unusual. It's very unusual. And even in those cases where I have had a revocation of surrender, I've even had birth mothers change their mind again. So they bring the baby into their home. They think, I can do this. And then they just don't have the support to make it happen. So rather than place that baby in foster care, we hope that she will, place the baby with the prospective adoptive family that had originally been matched with her.
Yeah.
I've seen that happen.
Wow. Yeah, it is very difficult for all involved, for sure. Yeah. So if the adoption plan proceeds as planned, is that the point at which ICPC is involved if you're an out-of-state hopeful adoptive family? Or is that the point at which you move to finalization if you're an in-state? Can you talk about kind of the path forward from there?
Yeah, so let's talk about a Tennessee family with a Tennessee birth mom first.
Okay.
Tennessee has a 6-month mandatory waiting period. So you're going to have your post-placement supervisory visits during that time. The home study agency is going to provide a court report and the home study to the judge. And we go to court usually just within, certainly within a month of the 6-month period, and we finalize the adoption. We get lots of good pictures, and Jenny usually cries, and
everyone cries.
Yeah. It's a really special day. And if it's an ICPC case, so most if the adoptive couple lives outside of the state of Tennessee, typically we are going to do a choice of law for that receiving state because Tennessee is so cumbersome in what we require with the surrender of parental rights, our waiting period, our revocation period. A lot of states either don't have a waiting period or it may be 24 hours or 48 hours, right? It's typically less than 4 days. And then revocation periods also vary, but sometimes it's irrevocable, right? And sometimes, there may be a period, but a lot of times it's shorter than those 3 days. So we typically, birth mothers typically choose the receiving state because they don't want to go to court. And I can't blame them. I don't want to go to court either for that reason. So it's a pretty difficult process to go to court. Sometimes transportation is an issue. Obviously, we do our best to get the birth mamas there. Sometimes, if you have someone who may not be a citizen of the United States, you may have a birth mom that has a warrant out for her arrest.
Yeah.
You may have a birth mom that was in foster care herself and maybe has some trauma around being in or around a courthouse.
Yeah.
All kinds of maybe her parents were involved with the law. We really don't know, but most people don't have positive um, experiences in courthouses. So that can be a pretty difficult process for folks. And they typically will choose to meet with an attorney privately and consent to terminate their parental rights under the laws of the receiving state.
Okay. So you talked about kind of choosing the state law there. So just to be super clear, I want to make sure I ask a couple of questions here. So if I live in Arkansas and I match with with an expectant parent that is in Tennessee, she could choose and we could choose together with our adoption attorneys, each of us, that we want to use the state laws of Arkansas to finalize the adoption. And then thus everything that you spoke about, the revocation, the termination, all of those periods and requirements then default to Arkansas. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Exactly.
Okay, perfect. Okay. And thank you. I think that has solved the next thought bubble that I had in my head there. That makes sense. Okay. So we are to the point now that say, so let me complete that thought bubble. Apologies for that. So if we choose the Arkansas law in that particular example, that a match with someone, baby's been born in Tennessee, then do we go through ICPC or do we immediately, so you still go through ICPC. So you still wait for clearance from the state of Tennessee and the state of Arkansas connecting together before you're allowed to travel back to Arkansas with baby from Tennessee.
Well, so first of all, let me say that you don't have to wait for the revocation period to lapse before you can go through ICPC.
Okay.
So as soon as that surrender is done and the baby is released from the hospital, right? Yeah. Both of those things have to happen because ICPC is going to want the baby's discharge summary.
Yeah.
Then you're free to go. You don't have to wait for the revocation period to expire once you get approval from both states to travel home. Remind me the question now.
It was just when you could travel home. So yeah, that totally,
okay.
That covers it. Yeah. And I think what we've touched on and demonstrated even in just this example is the importance of having an adoption attorney, right? Because there are so many different aspects of just slight areas of gray or that are really unique to each example in each situation. And you don't want to make the misstep and put an adoption opportunity in jeopardy because you didn't, dot an I and cross the T properly, right? And that's really where the adoption attorney in those states are really critical.
Yes. So an example of that is in Tennessee, if you have full guardianship of the child, you do not have to go through ICPC because those adoptive parents are the guardians and guardians don't go through ICPC. So typically in those cases, we have the prospective adoptive parents return to Tennessee to finalize the adoption. Tennessee is one of the minority of states that allow non-residents to finalize the adoption under some circumstances. So another reason why you need an adoption attorney, because it can be complicated.
It is. I oftentimes in my DM shows up those questions that are random. And I often say listen, I am not the expert to answer and help you here. You've got to talk to an adoption attorney. Here are the 3 questions I would ask, but you need to talk to an attorney.
Yeah. And often you're going to need an attorney in more than one state.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That is a really great point. And that is something that when you connect with an expectant parent, that is, you can figure that out. But I often caution people that because state law vary as it relates to support and what defines support and all of that the instant you are talking with somebody, you want to have someone on basically speed dial of hi, I'm in this situation. Please advise me, because you could, in a very well-meaning fashion, put an adoption in jeopardy from the moment go if not following the law to the T.
Yes. And Birth mother expenses are an excellent example of that because some states don't allow birth parent expenses at all.
Yeah.
Some states allow them under certain circumstances, like if you're matched through a licensed child placing agency.
Mm-hmm.
Some states require court permission, or some states require court permission over a certain amount. And most states have some time period. So in Tennessee, it's 90 days before and 45 days after the birth, or the surrender, that you can provide reasonable actual living expenses. And those are living expenses is defined as housing, utilities, food, maternity clothes, obviously any medical expenses that the baby may have.
Yeah.
We can do transportation as well. But it is limited to those things. And I always tell prospective adoptive families, never give anything of value to the birth mother unless you are working through your lawyer or a licensed child placing agency. Either of those folks are trusted people that understand the law and the process and can, we have to disclose all expenses to the court and to ICPC. So they'll have good methods of tracking that information, making sure you get receipts for everything. But because you're so limited under Tennessee state law, a lot of times adoptive families want to get like a matching necklace or something super sweet. And I have to say, no, you cannot do that.
Yeah.
And make sure you blame it on your lawyer, right?
That's what I often say. I always tell all the lawyers out there, I'm like, no offense, but you are there to help protect both of us in this situation. Yeah. So I'm going to use you as the bad guy here.
Yep, absolutely. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Sure. So yeah, a fruit basket, a robe and slippers, we can come up with sweet things to make sure the birth mother knows that we're thinking about her, we love her, we're grateful to her, we want to support her.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. So this has been incredibly helpful just to kind of set the stage for a baseline of understanding. I'm going to ask a couple of questions now as it relates to like self-matching and whether or not, kind of independent adoption, self-matching, whatever you want to call it, is allowed under Tennessee law. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Sure. So self-matching is allowed. We see a lot of sort of extended relationships. So not kinship or relative relationships, but, my coworker's cousin's daughter is pregnant and we've told her about you and she would love to talk to you, get to know you and see if this may be a good match. So we see lots of that kind of thing. And those tend to work out pretty well. Of course, just like in any other situation, birth mom may change her mind. But those are, I would say, low risk of fraud type situations and low risk, both in terms of any kind of financial fraud as well as any kind of emotional fraud because of those connections. Mm-hmm. We do see a lot of Facebook matching as well, which I would say are high risk for both emotional and financial fraud. Sometimes we've had situations where someone claims to be a birth mother or an expectant mother and she's not pregnant. We have situations where she is pregnant and she has matched with multiple families in an attempt to support herself and her family that she has already. So it's financial fraud. We've certainly seen emotional fraud as well, where pretty significant relationships develop between the person that is claiming that she wants to place her baby and, a very hopeful adoptive family. So those are pretty painful situations. I do recommend that folks use a licensed child placing agency to match, unless it's a situation where, there's that good connection, right? Yeah. And I think by definition, there's just some integrity to that. So I handled those types of cases quite a bit. Um, and, I'll handle the Facebook cases. I'm just super honest with folks that it's high risk.
Yeah.
And we get proof of pregnancy and we do a social medical history and we have her sign a power of attorney and we go out and we meet her. And we have a counselor meet her. And, we put in place a lot of times it's through that process of verification that things start to fall apart. Which honestly, you want things to fall apart sooner rather than later if it's going to be a failed adoption. So that's, making sure that it's an adoption with integrity is part of the process of the match. And so when you work with a licensed child placing agency, they are going to do that and they are going to support the birth mother and they're going to make sure that she understands all of her options, including maybe placing the baby with a family member.
That's right.
Including maybe placing the baby with someone that lives close to her. Maybe placing the baby with someone who's willing to sign a post-adoption contact agreement. Some birth mothers want a closed adoption and don't want, any information or contact. So, making our way through all of those decisions and really keeping the birth mother, giving her a lot of choices along the way, I think is part of making sure or doing what we can to make sure that the adoption is successful and that everyone has agency in that.
Yeah. I think it's really important. Something you touched on there is making sure that she has the support that she needs, no matter which method of matching you met through, right? Whether it be through a cousin or a Facebook or whatever, just making sure that you're giving the appropriate resources that are allowed under law to be provided as it relates to not just financial services, which is a lot of times what comes to mind first, but also giving those social support services as well. So that way that, she understands that she does have options. While you may be very hopeful that the option is you, but it is important that she makes a non-influenced decision in that, and that she feels that she has all the opportunity to do what is right for her and for baby, in that situation.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I often work with birth mothers that are resistant to counseling at first. And I always tell them, because it's not unusual to have an expectant mother want to create distance, right? Emotional distance in that type of situation, because it's very painful to face head on. And I say, look, let me get you connected with a counselor that I love. And there are several of them in Tennessee that I love and trust. And let's just build a relationship with them. Let's just make sure that if you decide when you're in the hospital that you want them to visit you, that it's not a stranger coming to visit you. It's someone that you know and respect and want to be with.
Yeah.
Maybe you want a counselor to come with you to the surrender hearing. That can be a huge comfort for folks.
Yeah.
And then of course, down the line, as you start to grieve and mourn and deal with the painful reality that adoption is, that you have that support person in place. And they're really good my counselors that I work with are good about connecting to long-term sustainable resources. So, making efforts to have sustainable housing, making efforts to have, getting that ID or driver's license in place so that you can get a job. Connecting you to Medicaid type of mental health services and case management services. So really trying to take care of and protect that birth mom and give her the tools so that she can move forward in a positive way. And oftentimes she has children that she's raising. So we want to be really protective. I hope that doesn't sound condescending in any way, but we want to make sure that moving forward, that she is prepared to manage her situation without putting her and her family at risk of homelessness, for example, or getting her drug and alcohol treatment if she needs it, whatever that looks like for her.
Yeah, no, I think that speaks very highly of you and your practice, that is a very important aspect of what you're doing. And that's, to me, when I am counseling hopeful adoptive families on the process, I tell them, like, listen, we're forming a relationship for a lifetime, right? And while that relationship will look different over time based upon where everyone is in their journey and their healing journey and all of that, what you ultimately want is a healthy relationship in total, right? So, whether you want a healthy connected relationship where you're literally, having that type of connection afterwards or not, you want everyone to be in as healthy of a, spot as you can. So I don't think that sounds condescending at all. I think that is honestly the appropriate approach, because you are making a family dynamic that is different for a lifetime. This is not just it's not a transactional relationship, or it shouldn't be, in my opinion.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we said that self-matching is something that hopeful adoptive families can do in Tennessee. I know there are tons of nuances, but one of the questions that I get quite a lot in our community is advertising allowed in this state, and what constitutes advertising? Do you mind to touch on a few of the kind of broad strokes there?
Sure. So Tennessee does not allow advertising. Facilitators are prohibited.
Okay.
Marketing firms are prohibited. And we see a lot of families that perhaps should have hired an attorney earlier on in the process that get themselves into situations that are then more difficult to handle from a legal perspective. And also more difficult to handle in terms of their risk. So something that I've seen a lot of lately is marketing and advertising agencies that are, for some reason, it tends to be $15,000 is what they're charging.
Yeah.
They are not doing anything to vet or support the birth mother.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't even doing anything to verify pregnancy. They aren't doing anything to identify or make any inquiry into the birth father. Mm. So basically what we have is a situation where we have someone claiming that they're pregnant and we have their name. Mm. And so folks are so wanting to be parents, and they're getting involved in these situations. And I have seen them work. I have seen them work out just fine, in positive relationships like you talked about. But that's a really high risk situation. And I discourage people from pursuing that. So if you can get an attorney on board early and often is what I say, they can help you avoid some of these really high risk situations and set you up for success.
Yeah, that is really important, that you understand the law in your situation and your state, right? And that, to your point, you're doing all you can to understand the risk and weighing those risks, right? And so for some people, the risks are, worth it to them. And for some people there aren't, but that's only a question that each individual person needs to ask. But my counsel again is reach out to an attorney in that state and ask those questions to them as you weigh those options.
Right.
Because creating a profile and sharing it in a vacuum can end you up in several different areas of risk as it relates to emotional risk, financial risk, and then ultimately, quite honestly, I think the worst is putting that adoption opportunity in jeopardy, should it prove to be a real opportunity. And so that can be very challenging.
Yeah. And a lot of folks, they get themselves into high risk situations and they don't realize it. And then they're fully invested in, this birth mama and this baby. And when I say invested, I primarily mean, emotionally invested. I mean, this is their child in their mind. And so it's an incredibly painful and vulnerable situation when that doesn't work out.
Yeah. It sure is. Well, this has been incredibly helpful. Are there any other things about the adoption process in Tennessee in specific or in general that you think it's really important for hopeful adoptive families to kind of keep in mind as they start into this journey or walk along if they're further along in their journey?
Yeah, I think I would at least mention Tennessee. I think it was in 2018. We enacted a statute for post adoption contact. So it's a legally enforceable agreement. You don't have to have one, but we often do them as a way of being fully transparent with both parties about what the expectations are. Um, and oftentimes, when I represent birth mothers, I always tell them this is your one chance to get in writing, right? And that, what the expectations are, that you're going to get photos, that you're going to get updates, that you may even have in-person visits, what that's going to look like as the child gets older. And a lot of times it'll be a staggered type of contact. So, the first year you're going to get lots of pictures, right? Because they change so much. And then as they get older, they're just so involved in baseball, they can't, they can't do as much. So we account for that as the child develops throughout their lives. And we're really big on including birth parents in contact and having as much as you can, because it's good for the triad, right? It's good for the birth mama, it's good for the child, and it's good for the adoptive parents.
It is.
And taking away the stigma and taking away the secrecy around it is a really positive thing for kids. So we do have those post-adoption contact agreements. I will say that my experience is that adoptive parents generally want more contact than they're able to get from those birth parents. So, that's how it plays out a lot of times, but it is enforceable. And so there's a whole process of going through mediation and getting, a psychological assessment, and then getting to a judge if you need to enforce that contract.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. I need to do some more research on that to understand if that's something in other states as well. That's the first time I've heard about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for your time today, Jenny. And we will include your information in the show notes. So wherever you're watching or listening to this video, you'll be able to quickly be able to find Jenny. But Jenny, do you have a particular spot that you want them to come find you should they have a question about Tennessee law?
Sure. I would say go to www.adoptmidtn.com. So I'm in Nashville. So we want you to adopt in Middle Tennessee.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for your time and expertise and sharing that with us. We appreciate all you do for our adoption community.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor to be with you.
Wow, wasn't that an amazing conversation? We are so lucky that Jenny took her time to share with us an overview of the adoption law in Tennessee. Not only is she knowledgeable, but she really broke it down in a way that we can all understand. And I don't know about you, but Jenny is totally my new best friend. She teaches us all the things as it relates to adoption law in Tennessee. And I know we forgot to talk about surrogacy law. So I'm promising you another episode. She's already agreed to it. So we can talk about surrogacy law in Tennessee. If you haven't already done so, please find her contact information where you're listening or watching to this video and reach out to her if you're looking to adopt a child in Tennessee. Remember, anything's possible with the right plan and support. We're all together stronger as a community when we work together. I'll see you soon, friend.